I sat down to do my video, and this cat jumped up, and he keeps trying to jump up on my desk, and I keep telling him to get down, and he just wants pets. That's all he wants. Even though I'm already running late. Of course that's when he wants the pets the most. I just stabbed your eyeball. Hey, pretty boy. I might give him a little bit of a rag bath today. Help him shed some of his fur. His fur just flying off him, especially around his tail. That's probably why he's so itchy. Oh, there's a fly. You gonna get it, Seba? So yesterday we worked the puff stitch, and I mentioned the popcorn stitch. When I said popcorn though, I was actually thinking of the bobble stitch, so I looked up the difference between the two, and I'll show you them today. These stitches are bigger than the puff stitch I showed you yesterday, and they have much more bulk to them. These are easier to do in a square pattern as opposed to a circle pattern, but since we've been doing circles, I wanted to see if it would work, and it did. Even though I messed up again. I always mess up. It's okay though. So start off with a decent size ring like we've been doing the last few days. Chain 5 or 6 and then slip stitch into the first stitch. Both of these stitches need to be worked with an even amount of stitches per row. So you can start with a single stitch, half double stitch, or double stitch going around our first row, as long as it ends up being an even amount of stitches. I used double stitches, which cover the same area as 2 rows of single stitches, so I went ahead and I just started with 16 instead of 8 like we did yesterday. And I ended up with 8 bobble and 8 single stitches in row 2 because I'm dumb and I forgot to do any increases in my second row. In my experience, if you start with a double-digit number, treat the following row like the third row, because your first row has as many stitches as your second row normally would. So you should do 2 single stitches, so you'll end up with 8 bobbles and 16 single stitches. So by this logic, if you start with 8 single stitches in row 1, you might end up with 8 bobble and 8 single stitches in the second row. That's 1 bobble and 1 single stitch in every single previous stitch. To end each row, I'm slip stitching into the first stitch from each row and chaining 2, which we count as one of our stitches for each of the bobbles. Each bobble has 5 unfinished double stitches. So yarn over, go through your loop, and yarn over again. Pull through that loop, and now you have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over and pull through 2 loops. Don't finish the double stitch just yet, and repeat what we've done so far a few more times. Your first bobble for each row will have 5 loops total before you yarn over and slip all the way through, before continuing on to your single stitch. Remember that all 5 of these unfinished double stitches are all coming out of the same exact loop. Every stitch after your first bobble in each row will have 6 loops total, since we're coming out of a previous stitch. You'll have 6 loops, you'll yarn over, pull through, and then move on to your single stitch. If 5 stitches per bobble is too much, you can do 4, or if it's not poofy enough for you, you could try 6 or 7. You guys know the increase pattern by now, so just keep doing this and follow along with that pattern, and you will end up with a nice poofy circle. So I went ahead and did a row of double stitches next. You do not need to do that. I was just doing this to make some space between the 2 different rows of stitches that I'm showing you. You don't have to do that unless that's the look you're going for. But moving on, Yes, the popcorn stitch does resemble popcorn, and you'll see why. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this stitch requires an even amount of base stitches. So start with 6, 8, 10, 12, something like that. And then each popcorn stitch, similar to the bobble stitch that we just did, will have 5 double crochets coming from one stitch. And yes, this should remind you of the fan stitch that we learned in the strawberry video earlier this week. So go ahead and chain 2, and that's going to count as your first stitch. And then we're going to do 5 double crochets. So yarn over, and coming out of the stitch you just came from, you're going to go through that stitch, yarn over again, and then pull through, and then yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through. And then you're going to make 5 total stitches. Once you have 5 double crochets, loosen your loop and take out your hook. Find your first double crochet from this stitch, and if you want your stitch to pop towards you, go in from the front. When you're working in a square, you'll be turning your work constantly, and you'll need to pay attention to which way your work is facing, so sometimes you'll come in from the back of the stitches, but we're working in a circle. So go through the front of your first stitch and slip your loosened loop from the 5th stitch. This pinches the stitches together and gives it the shape of popcorn. Depending on how much space you need between each stitches, since we're going around in a circle, you can chain a couple if you want. Here's where this differs from the bobble stitch. You do not do a single crochet next to it. You just continue doing your popcorn stitches. These stitches are a little more rectangular, whereas your popcorn stitch is more of a circle, and the puff stitch is more of an oval. So they all have very similar looks, but one of them might be easier for you than the other, so I highly recommend trying all of them. I'm sure there's stitches that I still don't even know of that are similar to this as well. So here you can see how the stitches all look. I hope my instructions were clear enough. If you have any questions whatsoever, leave them in the comment and I will address them. I want you to be able to do this for yourself if that's what you want to do. Don't forget to share your work with me if you are following along. I would absolutely love to see them. Tag samlescreations. I hope your work is going very well. I hope you have a wonderful day and happy crafting.